I'll make a voice for the Stanley Cup, how it would sound. Hello, I'm Stanley. I'm the cup, you idiot. I have a history of all your wieners. You have to know, team and player, when you're comfortable, who to invest in. And if you're not happy somewhere, you keep it going. It's not going to end up well. So, Robbie, would you like to continue? Go ahead.
Yeah. No, I think I have a couple of points left on this matter, Jimmy. And I was kind of going through, and we were kind of both getting to the fact that this has gone on way too long, right? And nobody wants us to continue to go on. It's obviously the guy that needs surgery still. It's to whether it's the Sabres, whether it's another team, somebody's going to be dealing with this. But I think what we all want to see is where this guy goes, right? That's the big question, is where this guy ends up playing, whether it's the divisional rival, whether it's in the Eastern Conference, or whether it's out west. Whether this guy plays, whether he gets back into the Olympics. I don't know that he gets that procedure when he's still under contract. I think there's something with the Sabres, I should say. There's something probably there that prohibits him. Otherwise, he would have just gotten it already, you would think. So he needs some sort of approval, and I think he needs to get that deal done in order to get that approval. And it has to be a team that will give him that approval. So you have to wonder what sort of leverage he has, what kind of trade list he has. You have to think that he's got a trade list, to further leverage where he ends up. So, I do think that there's a core set of teams, and I wanted to finish off with a projection, and I wanted to get your opinion, Jimmy, on what you thought of that. Is, you have to think that these teams are going to resurface again. We know that the Canadians are out because Kotkaniemi's not there anymore. That was a centerpiece that they wanted. They need a centerman back.
Yes.
Centermen are so difficult to come by. So when you look around the league and you look around teams like the Red Wings, I don't think they're in the market for him. I think Steve Yzerman's a bit too smart for that. Ottawa Senators, you never know with what Tkachuk's doing. You never know what could transpire there. With the Senators, anybody with cap at this point in a cap league is a candidate. Senators have a lot of young assets. Whether they would go down that road, I think they're in a good spot right now. Whether they would bring on somebody like an Eichel who can't play right now, they'll give up a ton of assets, and you never know what's going to happen there. So I'm not sure that they're really in the market. You kind of look at teams like, the Devils have been spending a lot of money lately. You look at teams like the Jackets, who are always up for bringing in free agents because nobody really wants to stay there. And it goes back to the Ducks too, right? I think the Ducks with Trevor Zegras, is who I was referencing earlier, is that top centerman. Sadly enough, in Anaheim, wouldn't they want to replace him, as promising as he is? Wouldn't they want to expedite that rebuild down in Anaheim? Fans are getting pretty upset. All down California. You go to the Kings as well. They don't really have a centerman behind Kopitar to give up for this guy. But these are the teams that have always been in the conversation, and I think that they're going to stay there. I think that the teams are, the GMs are kind of getting a bit tired of this, and they're saying, hey, you know what? We don't know what the situation is. We just literally got your medical records now. We can kind of see what you're after. Here's what we gave you. Here's the offer 5 months ago. Here's the offer now. And I guarantee you it's, a fraction of what was available 3 or 4 months ago. I think the Sabres are pretty handicapped at this point. They're going to probably have to let him go for something like, if you were in Vancouver during the Luongo fiasco, you saw that situation get from bad to worse, and you said, hey, this guy, as good of a goaltender as he is, as franchise of a player as he is, if that's even a phrase you're saying, he's going to go for nothing. Right, we saw that whole goalie fiasco between he and Schneider play out. Luckily, we got Horvat from that deal, but we saw that play out in front of our eyes, and we saw the issues that he and Tortorella were having. And said, "Hey, you know what? I feel bad for Gillis. I think it was the GM at the time. I feel bad for him because he doesn't have a leg to stand on when he's in these negotiations, and that's sort of the feeling I get from Kevin Adams. So I wanted to leave you, Jimmy, with my prediction.
Yep, go ahead.
And what I'll do is I'll give you a couple of teams. I may reach into the Kraken barrel a little bit. I may kind of bring up them as potential suitors because why not? They got a bit of cap room. They got some assets. Not as many assets as you think that Francis should have got from the expansion, like the Vegas Knights did. But they pulled some signings out of the barrel. They got Grubauer. You never know what they're talking, what sort of conversations have been happening. You got the Rangers. I honestly don't think outside of Zibanejad, the Rangers have much to offer the Sabres in terms of assurance on that top three player that they're asking for. You may see Zibanejad go. I know he's been in conversations before about being traded. You may see him being the centerpiece. I don't know that helps the Sabres now. So my prediction is I'm going to stay in California. I'm going to say either the Ducks for Zegras going back on that end. I'm going to say the Kraken probably have a pretty good shot at it. And you know what? You can't take the Knights out of the conversation. The Knights have shown themselves to be freewheeling guys down there in Vegas. That's sort of been the name of the game. They're going to retool. They're going to to bring on whoever they need to bring on. I just don't know how they do it. But I do know I also didn't know how they would get Pietrangelo. I didn't know how they'd get Robin Leonard. I didn't know how they'd fit Mark Stone in there. But they happen to do it.
Find a way.
We all know that contracts are going to go back to Buffalo anyways, right? You may get a big contract from Vegas, head back to Buffalo in the deal, similar to what teams have been doing to unload big contracts, right? They got to send some dead contracts back in order to make these big deals. So you can never really count teams out, but you got to look at these teams that need a boost. You got to look at teams that are somewhat desperate to expedite a rebuild, and that's where I'm looking for him.
Decisions made from desperation, really never the most wise. They're putting luck into that equation, right? You don't want to ever put that.
Yeah, and they're never made on logic. At that point, you're picking up the phone, you're taking the first call, you're getting tired of the situation, and you don't think that teams don't know that, right? Teams know what your situation is. It's in the papers every single day. They know you're under fire. Your fan base is literally burning the building down. And I go back as a Canucks fan and I say, hey, the Sabres and the Canucks came in at the same year, 1970, and both teams have yet to win a Stanley Cup. And you can kind of look back and laugh a bit. You can kind of say, hey, these guys are nowhere near the Cup 41 years later. And you kind of look at the Canucks and say, well, they've been there a couple times. Sabres have had their, the Brett Hall moment that they had in 99. They've been there too. But, when you see the turmoil that they've been through, you don't think that they hear that in Buffalo. It's a great hockey city. They've drafted at the top 5 of the draft every year, it seems, for the last 10 years. I want to say all the way back to, I don't know how long Dahlin's been in the league, but, that number 1 pick, they're still waiting on him to kind of get into that top 2 defenseman. Yeah. It's been ages, and you don't think that he's feeling the pressure. GMs know that. It's a small group. They meet every month at least. They're talking to each other. They pick up the phone. I'm sure Kevin Adams has talked to every one of these guys. Even guys like Toronto, I'm sure he's picked up phones from Kyle Dubas and saying, how can we make this thing work? How can we bring this guy to Toronto? They're probably every team's trying to get this guy. They're feeling deals, and now that they have their medical records, you're going to have a team that steps up and says, you know what, we'll take a flyer. Let's get him in surgery. We want this guy to play for us. We want him back soon. And if we can get him on a steal, this is the cheapest you're ever going to get this player. This is the cheapest you're ever going to get. If you look at it this way, this is the cheapest you're ever going to get a point-a-game player, and probably, in recent history. So you're going to have a ton of teams that are, bumping guys into the long-term IR. You're going to have teams like the Joffrey Lupul situation in Toronto. They're going to see that $4 million. They're going to see a marginally injured player. They're going to say, you know what, buddy, you're a bottom 6 guy. You're taking up $4 million. We're not going to clear you to come back and play hockey. We're going to put you on the long-term IR. You're going to have a lot of teams that are going to make some concessions because this is the cheapest, like I said, you're going to ever get this player right now. And I do feel like the pressure's on for Buffalo. If they play the season, if they get into the season, the regular season that is, with this still hanging over their head, without a captain, with Casey and Middlestat playing their first line centerman, they're going to be a laughing stock of the league. And I think that how do you recoup from that? How do you get players to come play for you? How do you if this goes on too long, how do you come back from this? And I honestly don't know how that's going to happen anyways, but I do think that, when a distraction has come up, even if it's a distraction of this magnitude, look at Ottawa, and I don't want to get off on another tangent here, but you look at the situation with Hoffman and Karlsson.
Mm-hmm.
And it seemed like the Senators were coming back. They were showing promise. I think they even made it to the finals. I think where they got beat out by Pittsburgh, or maybe they beat Pittsburgh when nobody thought they would get there. That was when they had Stone, they had Hoffman scoring 30 goals, they had Carlson in the back end. Shabbat, I believe, was coming up as a young guy. They had they had Anderson back in his prime, or kind of just at the end of his prime there. They had a great team. They were kind of getting back into the swing of things with a lot of these young guys. Nobody knew who Hoffman was.
That was post
Nobody
Carlson.
knew really who Stone was at that point.
Yeah.
But all it took was some emergence of some issues that Hoffman and Carlson had, and both were gone.
Absolutely.
And back when that was when we just did a hockey pool recently, and nobody took Carlson in 20 rounds. I think
I didn't even look at that.
I saw that, and I was going to take him in the last round. I said, "Hey, this guy's probably good for 20 points. He's making $11 million." But the Senators saw something. The Senators said, "Hey, we don't want this distraction. He's probably the best defenseman in the league at that point. We don't want that distraction on our team. He's gone." And people were up in arms in Ottawa. I followed that story very, very closely, and people were up in arms, and I think they're better off for it. Obviously, they won the deal. When they brought back the package of players that they brought back for him, and obviously the Stone deal. Bringing back Branston, and bringing back I forget who they got in that deal, but they've done the right thing. And when players, especially if you're not in any position to, the Sabres with or without Eichel are not making the playoffs. They're probably going to finish last with or without the guy.
Mm-hmm.
You have the cash in on your asset, but at the same time, is it worth having that hang over your franchise? It's not like you're on the cusp of winning the cup and this guy's going to help you. It's, do you want to hang on to this distraction? Do you want to have that be the talking point? When you're trying to move on, you've already unloaded Reinhart, which seemed like it was the easiest deal in the world.
Mm-hmm.
You're unloading a 30-goal scorer to Florida, and it seemed like it flew under the radar. You're saying, this guy scores as much as Eichel does. He scores just as much as Eichel does, maybe more, and he's just as a productive player that just flies under the radar. He gets unloaded, and nobody notices. Meanwhile, you're looking at this guy, and you're saying, this has been 6 months, and we're still dealing with this. I get it. He's a franchise player for the Sabres, and he's a point-of-game guy.
Mm-hmm.
But at what point do you pull the plug? And at what point does it look bad on the management? What point does it look bad on the franchise?
And where's the pressure coming from? And what is the actual information that fans aren't privy to? And even in retrospect. Let's look at
Pittsburgh. Actually, Jimmy, let me bring in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, go ahead.
Let me bring in Pittsburgh on this as far as projections go, and where this guy ends up.
Yeah.
You can never count a Brian Burke team out of making a big splash. You know that.
Oh, of course.
And I would say they were eerily silent in last year's trade deadline. They were eerily silent in the draft. They were eerily silent in the expansion draft. Where deals are often made.
Okay. Yeah.
And they had that Jari situation last year where the guy couldn't stop a puck, and they were losing games 6-5, and they were playing in shootouts. And you're having a core that's getting older. They're not getting any younger. And while Malkin and Crosby are there calling the shots, they're not going to rebuild. And Burke's never been one to rebuild. He's there. He's not pulling the strings. It's Hextall. But I've never known a Burke team to, whether it's to their detriment, going back to the Kessel and trading Sagan in Toronto, whether it's to their detriment, he's going to make an interesting splash. And I think he's been calling. I think Hextall and Adams have been talking, and who knows what goes back the other way. But you never know. You can't count these teams out it goes back to desperation, not just on Buffalo, but on the side of on the other trade partners. They're trying to bring in that X factor that sells tickets and that can bring them back into cup contention. So I'm following this thing closely. I'm getting tired of hearing about the back and forth. I'm getting tired of hearing about the distraction. But from a hockey and player management standpoint, this is as compelling as it gets. And I think for anybody that's that picked Eichel in their fantasy draft for some reason, or they picked a player that's been targeted in that deal, you're watching this closely as well from a fantasy perspective. You want to know where this guy ends up. And I think we all do. I think we're just ready to see this thing play out.
A lot of your sentiments I have echoed on this, especially now. Bring it back to Burke and your thoughts on. You think he's after Eichel, eh?
I think he's made calls.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that
Character guy.
it's really been it's really been a priority for them to sort of go out and make a big splash. I mean, they're middle of the line in terms of the cap situation. I'm looking at cap friendly, and I see about $100,000 in cap space. I mean, they're not.
Yeah.
The cap is not a luxury that they can that they can afford to play with. It's not like you're the Kings and you can say, hey, you know, I got a ton of cap. I got $12 million or whatever it is burning a hole in my pocket. You know, or you the Sabres, you know, with $17 million, right? Even with the Eichel deal, they don't care what contracts they bring in, right? If they're short-term deals, you know, they'll bring in whatever they need to bring in to get this guy out of there. But I look at GMs in this thing too. I look at GMs and I look at some GMs are very apprehensive to do anything with their teams, regardless of how much assets they have. I look at a Steve Yzerman and I say, you know what? Even if they have $13 million in cap, he's not the kind of guy that just goes out and makes a big free agent splash. He's never been that guy. He's the guy that's on the other end of the phone, selling these assets, getting the prospects back, and building a franchise. You know, you have guys like that you know are never going to make the splash. And I've just seen, you know, if I'm looking at any sort of team at the top of the league that would reach out and grab this guy, you know, you got to think that the Penguins in their situation. The Penguins are probably trying to make it happen. I don't know if there's any meaningful talk has been going on. I'm not an insider by any means, you know, but I've heard that. And I've also heard the Flames. Jimmy, have you heard the Flames?
What is it? You're not an insider? What? Where did I get you on here? I was just joking. It's funny when you've been talking here. It's pretty much echoing a lot of my thoughts on what I'm going to add. What I will add to that. The Burke, he wants character guys. He likes character guys. One can reference Neil Yakupov and another first overall that is pretty much in the opposite spectrum of Brian Burke kind of guy that he's going to be after. So he will go after these guys that he wants and he feels are the ones that, no matter what, he's going to make it happen. And Eichel is a character guy.
Were you referencing Patrick Stepan there? I think Patrick Stepan was involved. He was the first overall to the Sedins going 2 and 3, wasn't he?
My subconscious references Stepan all the time. I try not to think of him, but
I think you're in the same boat as the guy who was running the Thrashers back in '99.
I like Stepan.
You know, and getting into the Dallas Stars, I think he's one of those guys you kind of want to forget about, especially you know, when you think about the players you could have gotten first overall that year. But hindsight's always 2020.
That was a tough year. That was really a tough year for a lot of.
Well, let me get your thoughts. I'm curious now, Jimmy, on your thoughts on the Flames though, because I was looking at the roster earlier today and it kind of creeped out of nowhere. But you've heard that, you know, going to the Brady Tkachuk deal, that are the negotiation that the Senators are going through right now, and you know, Matthew is coming up with as an RFA, and he's kind of been a proponent of the fact that the Tkachuks are pretty hard to deal with, and even going back to Keith, you know, I don't think it's a medal on the wall to be a hard person to do business with in the league, and I think when you're holding out into the season. You know, and you know the kind of value you bring, and you're turning down $64 million on 8x8. It doesn't look good for you, you know, and that kind of goes back to our conversation about Eichel. It's like there's stuff coming out that it, you know, when a situation goes on this long, you have people that are looking at it and they're saying, you know, they're coming to their conclusions. They have a ton of time to come to conclusions, and you're saying, well, this guy is letting this get into the season. Whether it's you agree with how Dorian and those guys have been negotiating with them, you know, these are players that want their own deals, right? We go to the Canucks and we see the player friendly deals for Hughes and Pettersson. You know, players of this age when they're getting out of their contracts and they're in the big money. I don't think it's really about the money as much as it is the term and the leverage they have when the contract is over. And, you know, they have to take care of themselves. They have to protect themselves. And I kind of look at Tkachuk and I say, maybe the Flames are kind of thinking that, hey, we're going to go through a similar negotiation as we did as Ottawa's doing with Brady. And we already know that this is probably a tough negotiation. The guy's going to want a boatload of money. Maybe you're looking at getting him out of there, you know, and conversations have been happening, you know, over the last couple of years about Goudreau and Monahan, whether they're the core that's going to take them a step further. There's a ton of assets in Calgary that could expedite whether you're looking at Lindholm even on the top line. He's a potential 30-goal scorer. What do you do there? You have a lot of NHL-ready prospects, or a lot of NHL-ready players, I should say, and then a ton of prospects on the Calgary side. Potentially, you could see him go up to Canada. Not that the guy would probably want to play in Calgary. I don't know. He's played in Buffalo. He doesn't mind the cold.
Mm-hmm.
You think that the Canucks would want to see the guy 8, 9 times a season? I don't know, but that's a compelling destination. I've heard the Flames have been in on it since day one.
Yeah, when piecing together any of these situations, it's important to really look at the player and look at why he's thinking a certain way, and whether he's comparing his numbers to others and using that as an argument. And look at a guy like Keith Tkachuk back in the day. He's raising his kids to be the same way. If they're anything like Keith, you pay them, because it's not going to do any good to not play him enough to try to get his numbers down. He knows who he is as a person. He knows who he is, what he can bring. Brady is the same way. I feel you pay Brady what he wants in this situation. Any other prospect that I didn't know, I wasn't sure on as much, I take a lot longer to make an opinion on this, and I'm still taking more time to get that concrete, opinion.
I think the big thing there, Jimmy, is that the Canucks kind of went through that with Pettersson and Hughes, is that when you're at the cap, right, the Canucks are right there, and they've been there for a long time, to the displeasure of the fan base that's looking at it and saying, how are you going to build a team when you're already at the cap and you're not even making the playoffs? So the Senators are saying, we got to be smart about this. We can't be giving as valuable as a player as he is. Do you back up the Brinks truck into his house and say, you're the guy? Right. We know that the cap and going back to the Leafs is that, you can build a top heavy team. You can pay 3 forwards $10 million a piece. And you know that you can't, you have a cap of 91 million or 87 million or whatever it ends up being this year. Mm-hmm. Your cap is finite. It's probably not going to go up over the next couple of years. It may only go up a very small amount.
Well, it's supposed to, unfortunately. Yes. Things didn't work out that way.
A couple $1 million, a couple $1 million, right? And so you're paying this guy. And I truly don't believe it's about money. I think the guy looked at $64 million over 8 years and said, hey, I don't want to be here for 8 years. I don't think players really want that term anymore.
I don't blame them.
Some of them may do.
Yeah.
But they want that, looking at the Patterson deal, like Hughes deal. Hughes you look at that contract and say, well, the guy got $7 million. He's not at McCarr's level, but he's also a little bit better than Dahlin. Dahlin got 6, I believe. So you look at that deal and you say, well, what else is really there? You look at maybe a no movement clause, Benning loves giving those out. You look at all the other tangible things. The signing bonuses are a big thing. Guaranteed money, getting that money up front. There's a ton of things that go into contracts. But you look at the term on these contracts. Patterson got a 3-year bridge, which keeps him into his RFA years, and he's going to prove himself or prove to Vancouver that he does get that money. And by 3 years, the cap could be a lot higher than what it is today. So there's a lot more share of money for him. And Hughes, the guy gets to stay here for 6 years. He gets to kind of try to ride that wave into the playoffs and build the Canucks into a perennial contender. But that brings him to the first year of his UFA, right? And that's where it gets important, because the guy's still young. He's still 27 at that point. Mm-hmm. He can still get a ton of money on the UFA market. And he also has the ability to leave and go play with his brothers wherever they end up.
Yeah.
So players are looking at that. And I think what Brady's looking at, he's saying, well, $64 million is not a huge amount of money. It's not going to age well, right? Players that look at Rantanen, whatever you call them, down or Marchand, or any of these guys in Boston, they sign their deals. They sign their long-term deals. Even Ovechkin, even these guys that are signing big deals. You look back 4 years later and you see these guys are a steal now, because they signed it 4 years prior when the $6 million was a big deal, and now the cap's gone up and now you're middle of the line. You're like this 40-goal scorer, 40-point guy is getting just as much as me.
How did that happen?
You're the leader on the team, so. Yeah. I think there's a component of that where players are like, hey, there's a ton of raises going on the UFA market. I can cash in. I can choose where I want to go. I can have that leverage over the team. But if I'm making if I'm on an 8-year contract, to this team, and I'm not really happy with the sum of money, where I think I'm going to be in 3 or 4 years, am I going to be a $6 million player in 3 or 4 years? I hope he doesn't think that. He probably thinks he's going to be a $10 million guy. So then why would he bank on himself? Why would he sign that deal over 8 years for only 64 million? So those are the things that are going on, I think, in their heads. And I think they're just, I hope it doesn't get into the season, because the last thing the Senators need is a contract negotiation with arguably their best player. But these are the things that the GMs are dealing with now. There's a lot of things going on, Jimmy, out there, and there's a lot of. I wouldn't want to be well, I would actually, I think, but I can certainly feel their pain, right? And you look back at the Slats back in the Rangers, right? He's making moves. He's bringing in Lindros, bringing in Yager. They're paying $100 million. Like it was nothing. When payrolls were close to 60 or 50, they're paying $100 million.
Yeah.
They don't care. And nowadays you're looking at analytics. You're looking at percentages of how leveraged you are in certain positions. You're looking at term. You're looking at LTIRs. You're looking at all these sort of things. Recapture, buyouts, compliance buyouts. You're looking at tons of things now.
More to come, I'm sure.
Yeah, they're unloading money.
Mm-hmm. The business sure expanded for both sides.
Big time. It makes it more compelling for people like you and I to be able to analyze it and talk about it.
Oh, absolutely.
But I wouldn't want to be in these guys' positions. As much as I can talk about Kevin Adams in Buffalo, the guy's got a terrible situation ahead of him, and they're just recycling GMs. I don't think anybody, you can put Scotty Bowman, in that position. You can put any of these guys in that position, and they're going to, maybe make a couple of different moves that Kevin Adams maybe didn't make or did make. They make them a little bit differently, but it's a tough situation regardless of how you look at it. And I think that, it is a cautionary tale, when you do have that discussion on injuries, players getting injured a ton. Even Vancouver with Pettersson, right? He's had those years where he's had a couple of injuries, and you really got to tread lightly when it comes to those conversations, because, there is a players union for a reason, and there are team doctors, there are teams that are looking out for their players, but a lot has happened in healthcare over the last 10, 20 years that teams need to start looking at. And if doctors are saying, hey, I just want to, going back to the football analogy, right? You just give the guy a painkiller in the knee and you send him back out there. You say, hey, it's just a concussion. Just don't worry about it. There's so many tales where guys like Leonard are coming out and saying, hey, there's some truth to this. The teams maybe not always have your best interests in mind when they're sending you back out there. And I think it's good that he's coming out. I hate that it's on Twitter. I think you have a player union for a reason.
Yeah,
but all these things end up coming out on Twitter, and I guess that's where you got the exposure. But you have a players union for a reason. You can air grievances through the union and not necessarily tarnish some guy's name. If Alan Vigneault, for example, the guy doesn't even know who Leonard is. He's never. Well, he knows who he is. He's never met him. Probably he's never played on his team, I don't think. Mm-hmm. And you come out and you kind of that's a pretty heavy allegation. So you look into that what you will. I think it's important that some players come out and shed light on it, but I think the Twitter avenue is a little played out, and it can be you think it's just 167 characters. It's nobody takes it seriously, but you send a tweet out with those allegations, and all of a sudden you're in a meeting with the commissioner of the league, and it's being taken very seriously. So you kind of got to watch what you say, but it's also good that these guys are coming out and speaking, even though it should have been done. Whenever this stuff has been happening, why not come out? It's not like you're afraid of, in these sexual assault cases. And I don't want to get too deep in this conversation, but
absolutely, the repercussions of everything.
Why you'd stop, right? There's reasons why you wouldn't talk.
Especially when the first you'll be paying the most of a price for your words and being the first. Same time, if you're not going to be the first. With all that's going on, with all the stresses and distractions like we were talking about earlier, it's sooner or later they're going to be doing it anyways. Players are going to be doing it anyways. You might as well do it right away. Help yourself. Help whatever you're going to pay. I mean, you're doing it for everybody. With all those things, at the end of the day, you got to play hockey. You got to do your job as a GM. With all of that's going on, all the extra business stress, you're going to have more on the mental side to be taken care of, because you're an athlete. The mental side is huge. Just even to play hockey and with anything. With that just alone, without any other, life problems, family, being an adult, being a human being, there's so much. if you want to be a human being, it's actually tougher than it might sound. If you're, if you're professional at anything.
Yeah.
So yeah, tougher life gets, the more you gotta take care of yourself in every way. So
Well, and look at Owen Power, and they're saying, well, Owen Power got drafted first overall by the Sabres this year, and the first thing he did was go back to his his minor league team, and they're saying, hey, well, he took one look at the dressing room and said, hey, I'm out.
yeah,
That's not necessarily a bad thing for
too
guys,
overwhelming
first of
for a
all.
kid too. If you're not quite ready and you're wise enough to make
Yeah.
that decision for yourself, that's
Exactly.
that's
First
a
of all,
good
that
kid.
happens a lot, right?
Yeah.
And it should have probably happened. It should probably happen a lot more often. Looking at guys like Lafreniere, right?
Okay,
He came
yep.
up and he scored 24 points or whatever it ended up being. The guy was meant to be a generational talent. He goes first overall. He plays for the Rangers of all teams. Comes in, plays first year, and nobody really knows his name. Generally. You look at the Rangers as a potential contender, like they should have with Capo Caco, and they have a ton of young guys.
Go.
Panarin, a lot of these guys are coming in, and you're saying, well, what's going on? Is it the Ranger curse of no matter who you bring in or what contract, they're not going to play up to their potential? But I'm surprised it doesn't happen more often where guys are sent back, especially if you're in the Sabres. Like you're probably happy this guy said, no, I'm not playing, and maybe you even said, kid, you're not going to want to come up here this year. There's nothing here for you. You can come up here and you can kind of make a bit more money. You can sign your entry level contract. You can probably get a faster way to your first deal. But even then, it's not guaranteed, and it may work against you. You may come up and you may be like left in a year. Like, you think the kid has any leverage in negotiating a contract in 2 years? Like, unless he has 2 years really to make his case for a big RFA deal, and I think he burnt one of those years by not progressing in a minor league system. So, a lot of people kind of gave them a bit of a hard time there, but I think it was certainly what the Sabres wanted, and I think it's going to play out. And who knows who you have in the kid as well, right? You want to make sure you know who you have in them. And I don't think on that team is even though it's almost like a minor league team, right? It's almost like playing on an AHL team, but you are still playing NHL players, and I don't think it's a great situation. I certainly wouldn't want to be in that position. And for the Sabres, you have a chance to start over. With a top defenseman that many believe is even better than Dahlin is a legit top guy.
Yeah.
You don't want to burn any of those bridges. You don't want to get into a situation where this guy hurts his neck, and now you have a couple of situations with the team doctor. But
never want to make it harder on yourself. No, it's
not to make jest out of it, but I think that was a good move by them, and I'll be looking at them. I mean, I think 2 years ago before Eichel got hurt, I was calling for the Sabres to make the playoffs.
okay.
That's my hot take. That's my hot take for the day. I like Cousins. I like even though Cousins was on the roster. I like Middlestad. I like a couple of other guys. I was back on.
You like your Cousins?
Posto, I believe still. Sorry.
You like your Cousins? You're saying. A good thing you're anonymous, right?
I liked him. I liked him in the World Juniors.
Yeah.
I liked him in the World Juniors. I think he's a good addition there. But all that to say is that he wasn't even on the team back then. I liked their rookies. I think of Posto. I thought Posto would continue his play. I like the addition of Skinner, even though they paid him a ton of money. I thought they were building a pretty good team, and then with Olofsson coming up and challenging Peter Pettersson for the Calder that year. I think he's either Pettersson or Besser. Maybe I'm getting my dates mixed up, but he was up there. He scored 30 goals, if I'm not mistaken. So they had a lot of good assets, and a lot of people forget about that. They had a pretty good team with Reinhardt coming up. They had some Ristolainen, who I believe is gone now. They had a lot of good assets there, and you never know how these things just fall completely off the rails, even before the mental situation comes in.
No matter how much you're building, you got to have that in place.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why the shelf life for some of these teams is just so short. You can go through a monster rebuild, and you can, it takes you 20 years in some cases, right? You can go through a rebuild like Boston keeps doing. They don't rebuild, they just retool.
Mm-hmm.
And, you don't understand in the cap world how fragile that is. You go back to Ottawa, right? You have a player situation that blows up your entire rebuild, and now you have to start again. It's a fragile thing,
mm-hmm.
but at the same time, that if you do give up an asset, and this has happened time and time again, is if you give up an asset you can get it back. I mean, they just drafted first overall. Maybe
Absolutely.
the better way to do it is you start with a couple of good defensemen, and you build your forwards. You hope Middlestad ends up being a top six centerman. Maybe you start at the back end. You figure out a situation for your goaltending. I mean, a lot of people were kind of weirded out by the fact that they lost Allmark for nothing after going by the trade deadline. So, I mean, there's things that they probably could have done to just help retool, whether it's bringing more draft picks or whether it's kind of shipping out guys like Brian Hart or even keeping guys like that. I mean, the guy's a 30-goal scorer. He's a young guy. And they shipped him out for, I can't remember the return that he got for him, but, there are some moves where you look back in hindsight, you could say, well, hey, there's a reason why there's teams like, the Red Wings or Tampa, going back to how Tampa was built. There's teams that are able to rebuild very quickly because they make smart draft decisions. The culture is where players want to play. They have no problem getting RFAs. They don't make stupid decisions, and they're able to develop their young players. And that's a common thing. You look at Chicago, you look at Boston, you look at teams that are able to keep their players. They're able to develop very quickly.
This is an excellent
clubs like the Sabres
Yep.
that have a hard time. Right? They have a hard time getting players. It's a great hockey market. They have a hard time getting players. It's a far cry from the Mike Pekkas and the Dominic Hasiks of the world. I mean, that's obviously that was in the 90s. It's a long time since they really had some playoff success. You can look back at 2007 when they were up there with the Senators and Ryan Miller. But as far as that goes, I mean, it's been such a long time, and when that happens, you look at culture of the club and people that are running it. I think that's where I start, and I think they've been through a few GMs over the years, a few coaches, more than a few coaches. I'm not even sure, maybe a couple of owners, maybe. I don't know what's really going on there, but it seems to be a bit deeper than
way more important than a draft lottery, anyways. The luck comes into play and how that's overrated. I find
big time, yeah.
How many exceptional players are really there when it comes to if they can succeed despite an organization? It's in spite of them or with them. It's you're giving players no help and they'll still overcome. Those players don't really come around very often.
Exactly. Now, Jimmy, I think you have a question for me about the Stanley Cup, and I wanted to make sure I answered that for you.
Still ranting off. Yeah, all right. Well, I wanted to give you one question here because it's an important one for something that we'll see later. But one topic that we had on tab here is the Stanley Cup. If it could say one thing, what would it say if it had a voice? Stanley Cup. And go ahead.
You know what? In anticipation of this question, I'll tell the listeners out there that I had a bit of I had a couple of minutes to think about my answer here. And the first thing I did, and I've heard stories about what's happened in the past, and the Cup has a 100-year history. There's tons of things that have happened.
Yes.
Whether it's showing up at a strip club, at the neighborhood bar, at somebody's bar mitzvah, at somebody's house. It's been everywhere. It's if it could talk, it would have a ton of wisdom and a ton of stories. But the first thing I would say is that, first of all, it probably wants to retire.
Yes.
It probably wants to stop getting carted around in a black box and showing up at people's birthday parties and getting lifted up.
And it doesn't get out much.
Being left on the side of the road, being peed in, being eaten out of by a dog or a horse. It's been through the ringer, and I think it's probably wants to retire.
I hope it's been washed many times.
Hopefully, I think people drinking out of that thing, they need to really know the history of what's been going on. Yep. But I really do think that what it would say is that, hey, just don't put any cheap beer in me. Make sure it's Dom Perignon when you're drinking in the dressing room. I think that's really all they can ask for when it's been taken out of the box. Absolutely.
I think it's a very good. I could see it happening. And that's a good one.
I'm sure it's going to have some choice words before it gets to that point.
We should really go easier on the Stanley Cup as it gets older. It might have to be replaced if we don't take care of it eventually. I'll have to find a new Stanley, but that's another one. That's an exceptional cup right there. It's one you want to win for. So I will add one thing I think the Stanley Cup would say if it ever had a voice, and For the viewers that are watching right now, I do some voice work um, aside from this, and so sometimes I'll do impressions and I'll make a voice for the Stanley Cup, how it would sound. Hello, I'm Stanley. I'm the cup, you idiot. I have a history of all your wieners.